Hello, Media-eval listeners. This is going to be part 2 of Media-eval's discussion on Game of Thrones with me and my mom, Beth Greenfeld. And I just wanted to, up top, provide, once again, spoiler warning just for the entire series. And also for this particular episode, a content warning since we do get into some discussion of sexual assault in the series. So please enjoy the episode, and thanks for listening to me. Gender that needs to be mentioned is the fact that there is an immense amount of sexual assault in this show. Going back even to episode 1, where we first see Daenerys groped by her brother and then raped by her husband.
Do you want to wake the dragon?
Jesus Christ. I hate him so much. Why did she name a dragon after him? It's like the most Stockholm Syndrome thing ever, that she has any positive feeling for this disgusting piece of shit. There is, as I said, there's an immense amount there, sexual assault of essentially random nameless women. There's the sexual assault of prostitutes. There's an immense amount of marital rape.
There's what's his name? The one Karstark, what's his name, who's raping all his daughters? And John gets very upset and says, let's do something. Yeah. And the guy says, well, we know, but he's an ally.
Right. And of course, there's the kind of big scene that everybody has spent a lot of time talking about of Sansa being sexually assaulted by her now husband, Ramsay Bolton. This is something that both Martin and the showrunners have talked about before. And they have talked about this in the sense of we need to have a lot of sexual assault because it's authentic to the period. And we don't want to shy away from this depiction of the period. First of all, and this is a problem that I will discuss in another area as well, you've got dragons. You're not authentic.
Sexual assault. I'm laughing at the ridiculousness of that statement.
Of course. So first of all, you've got dragons. Clearly you don't care about authenticity. It's a show about dragons and ice demons. You could not have sexual assault. It would be fine. That's problem 1. Problem 2 is if people just included depictions of sexual assault because they care about authenticity, there wouldn't be a single film that took place on an American college campus that didn't include multiple scenes of sexual assault.
I read that soldiers didn't rape women until after the Reformation because Catholics wouldn't rape Catholic women. It's just that Protestants would rape Catholics and Catholics would rape Protestants.
I think that's ridiculous.
Of course it's ridiculous.
I'm not saying there wasn't rape in assorted contexts, military and otherwise, in the medieval world. Also, there's an immense amount of scenes of what would be characterized as marital rape in Game of Thrones. Marital rape certainly was legal in the medieval world. However, it was also legal everywhere until the 1970s, 80s?
1970s. And it still exists.
Yeah, it still obviously exists and happens.
What do they say now? That 1 in 5 women has been sexually assaulted in the United States? Now? Today?
Yeah.
1 in 5? And 1 in 5.
And that's then the thing is, yes, of course there was rape in the medieval world. Of course there was rape culture in the medieval world. Rape culture is not medieval. Rape culture is just basically how our society works and what it's built on. And honestly, I don't think there's especially good evidence for saying that there was a kind of higher rate of sexual assault in the medieval world as opposed to the modern one right now in the United States.
No, they don't have date rape drugs.
Right, exactly. We've made it easier to rape women.
I don't know when it ended, but the only difference is that unlike the Roman times and Lucretia, if you're raped, you don't feel it necessary to kill yourself. Hopefully. I mean, obviously with the PTSD and God knows what else, it has horrible, horrible effects on you. But it's not, I don't think it's like Lucretia, where the second you're raped, you say, should I live? Should I die? I better die.
Right. I mean, in most contexts, we don't have the same honor culture surrounding rape, but still, we do still have an immense amount of essentially blaming women for being raped, so that you don't have the kind of assumption that women who are raped, the only outlet for them is to then kill themselves. On the other hand, there's an immense amount of essentially saying that women, the legitimate rape one.
No, the line about that white kid who got out of jail in 7 months or something as opposed to something else. They say Brock Peters. That's somebody.
Brock Turner.
Brock Turner. They said somebody spent more time in jail than Brock Peters. I can't remember.
I can't remember exactly what it is, but Brock Turner spent an astonishingly short time in jail because we care more about male rapists than we do about women victims.
Yes, it might ruin his life.
Yeah, because we don't care if he ruined the wife of the woman he raped. So the point of this really is just rape culture remains deeply pervasive. And I've said this before on this podcast, but I do think that there's an effort to essentially emphasize rape culture as being something pre-modern to try and convince women that we have it better now, when in that particular respect, I'm not quite sure we do.
Well, I mean, I'm not taking away from that, but there's that whole movement that your medieval people were really violent and were much nicer now. Where the fuck are they getting that from?
Right, and that's, and so that's the Steve Pinker argument in The Better Angels of Our Nature. We've gotten less violent. And one of the very good, and there's a number of very good critiques of that, including the fact that he knows nothing about the Middle Ages. Right, and one of the critiques about that is that the only medieval source he cites is a coffee table book written by a man who is not an academic and whose main occupation is as a sword swallower.
I like this. I'm putting that up. I should have said that when I was saying why you invited me here. I should have said I'm a really good sword swallower.
Right. You're much more qualified than the person who wrote that book. But that's the thing, is that you have that he clearly doesn't know anything about the Middle Ages, but it's also that he dismisses and ignores in his book massive
Pinker,
categories.
Or are we on Game of Thrones?
Pinker.
Oh.
That Pinker, when he's talking about modernity, ignores major categories of modern violence, one of those being sexual assault, and the other of those, and this actually is going to be a lead-in to another thing I want to talk about, another of those being mass violence perpetrated often by law enforcement against Black and brown people. That he doesn't give a shit about that. That doesn't count.
Right. As I said, he's not watching TV.
So that then is going to lead into that I also would like to talk about race and ethnicity in Game of Thrones. So, first of all, there is, of course, the initial problem of just lack of representation. Game of Thrones, as I have said before, has a cast that is so large that it has its own special Wikipedia page just for the cast. Of that, there's 4 actual characters who are people of color?
I don't know. Who's the 4th? I only count 3.
I was thinking in terms of people who are actual, named characters that you know think about. Khal Drogo, Grey Worm, Missandei.
And Grey Worm, that's 3.
So that's 3, and then, Dorne actually, I think, gets complicated. Several of the actors cast are not white, and Dorne has kind of Spanish vibes, and arguably there's kind of Al-Andalus connections. So Dorne arguably has a kind of Arab flair, essentially. And Spain clearly is the inspiration for it. Well, Castile is clearly Castile Al-Andalus is clearly the inspiration for Dorne. But so that's part of it, is that there's very few actors and characters of color. This is something also that, again, the showrunners and Martin have talked about in terms of authenticity. Once again, you have dragons and ice monsters. If you can suspend your disbelief about ice monsters, I'm pretty sure you can suspend your disbelief about there being a Black person who's among the nobility.
I don't think anyone would have noticed, except for crazy people.
Yes, and there's obviously crazy racists out there.
I don't think anybody would have said, first of all, people don't even know that there weren't any, because there were some. Of course there were. So it's just nonsense.
Yeah, so that's the thing, too, is that there were people of color in the real medieval world.
And even if
for the most part, not among the nobility, but they existed.
You can put them there if you put dragons there. So who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd rather have a woman brewer than...
Right. It's have a Black woman brewer. It'd be great. But yeah, and so that's very much the thing, is that also, there were people of color in even medieval Western Europe. There weren't a lot of them, but there were some. So there's that too. But then, as I said, there's really just a very much thing this is not medieval Europe. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And then there are the issues with the few characters of color that we do have. And the big one is the Dothraki. The Dothraki are presented as just pure barbarians. Just this avatar of lack of civilization.
Do the wedding line.
Oh yes, that there's that a Dothraki wedding without at least 3 murders is considered a dull affair. The analog for the Dothraki, or the main analog for the Dothraki, are, it seems, probably the Mongols. And, I'm not going to say, the Mongols were, lovely, kind, generous, friendly people.
Did they have a word for thank you in Mongolian?
There certainly is a word for thank you in modern Mongolian. I could not find any indication one way or the other about whether there is a word for thank you in kind of medieval Mongolian. If there is anybody who's listening who knows one way or the other, please do let me know. But it's not something. And so I spent a lot of time actually going over William of Rubrich's account of the Mongols. And so this is, a French Franciscan who's
writing when?
13th century, who's this kind of unofficial emissary who's kind of hanging out with the Mongol Khan and sort of reporting back to Louis IX of France. And that's not something that, and certainly that's not something that he mentions. And that's the thing, is that, he is not especially kind to the Mongols. He clearly sees them as somewhat barbaric. But to be honest, they seem actually less barbaric than the Dothraki do.
He didn't say anything about watching them pour molten silver on anybody's head?
No. They didn't have that, and so, and half the extent to which he actually sees them as being to some extent barbaric is basically just the fact that, they're not Christian. He really cares more about that than anything else.
We're going to talk about religion later?
Yes. And in particular, I think it's important to comment on Mongol women, in that the Dothraki are presented as being, Westeros already is not a great place for women. This world in general is not a great place for women. The Dothraki are presented as being even worse. No evidence that this would be true of the Mongols. First of all, there's been some pretty decent scholarly arguments saying that even the Mongols actually, relative to some other groups, arguably discouraged rape of captives.
Wow.
Not because they cared about women, as opposed to because they thought it was not a good use of their time. But still. That basically was concentrate on the war, don't bother raping the women. But that there is not great, but that there have been some arguments saying that there's really no evidence for Mongol mass rape in wartime. And when you actually look at elite Mongol women, it's very clear they actually could divorce. They could initiate divorce. Unlike, so no one could get divorced really without a lot of church intervention in medieval Catholicism, and among Jews and Muslims, only men can initiate
Jewish women
divorce.
Still can't initiate divorce in the Orthodox world.
Yeah, so Mongol women could initiate divorce.
Wow.
So they're actually arguably better off in some ways. They also could certainly own property. And there are a number of examples of elite Mongol women basically, again, kind of ruling as regents in ways that are, not dissimilar at all to the kind of thing that we see in, some of these elite Western European women. So that they certainly had at least basically as much of a kind of avenues to power.
Are you just saying
Western
that
European
because they're your ancestors coming from Russia as you do?
Because of all the rape. But and that is definitely one of the things that is fascinating. Again, I'm certainly not saying that it was, a paradise of gender equality, but there's certainly, I don't think, is an especially good argument to say that if as a woman you're especially worse off being Mongol than anything else in, say, the 13th century. And in addition, by the way, arguably you're potentially better off in some ways, because the Mongols were known to have basically also said that this isn't worth our time. They actually discouraged things when they conquered China. They actually were not on board and discouraged the practice of foot binding.
Do you know whether they were afraid of water?
That I don't. They clearly had a more kind of horse-based culture. I don't think that they were really afraid of water in the same way, is my sense. But I think that they it didn't make the idea of going across a sea to have a war didn't feel like a great idea, because they were very focused on the horses.
And you can get from Russia to China just walking, right?
Yeah, or riding.
You don't have to swim.
Yeah.
So it was just another way to humiliate the Dothraki by saying they're a bunch of weenies. Water weenies. Yeah.
It kind of adds to this level of superstition. Again, not saying that there weren't, superstitions that they had or weird customs, Yeah, they certainly, they were like very into their horses and like drank this really weird beverage that was like fermented mare's milk, which sounds truly disgusting.
Oh, I've heard of that. The people,
Hummus.
I think people still drink it.
I think they do, yes, and not to yuck other people's yums in Mongolia or elsewhere,
Yeah,
but
no, I think that's a standard dish.
yeah. So it really does seem basically like they just kind of want to display this group, which is essentially the only substantial group of people of color that we have, as being, as I said, this just stereotypical group of barbarians.
Wait. Where do the Unsullied come from? Aren't they people of color?
Yes, or at least most of them are. Certainly their leader is, and Grey Worm.
The Unsullied are soldiers, right? Not slaves?
Yes. Yeah, or well, they're both. They're slave soldiers.
Okay. But they're become slaves because of their race?
No. So I will say that they're in that kind of area around Marine. That's where the Unsullied are.
Uh-huh.
That's true. Is that those actually also seem to like vaguely be people of color, but they're not really real characters.
And how did they become? Are they all orphans?
I think they capture them.
Oh.
And then they also castrate them.
Yeah, I remember that. I just wondered where they got them all from. It's not like the France taking all their soldiers out of orphanages.
No, I think they capture them. I mean, it's so the analog for the Unsullied, except for the castration part, is really probably like the Mamluks.
Oh, really? I thought the Mamluks
I mean, in that it's this kind of mass group of slaves. It's that they're a group of slave soldiers, and then eventually, basically, they just took over.
Okay. I sort of caught up with them when they took over.
Right, but before that, so eventually there was a dynasty because that's where the first kind of person of that dynasty came from, is from the ranks of these slave soldiers. But that's how they started, essentially.
And where does she pick them up again?
Oh, God, in and around Marine.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, because that's also, we spend so much time in Marine, and I will say also just especially because of how it's done in both the show and the book, I just struggle to give a shit about Marine, because there's no reason that's actually ever given to us to care about Marine, to be honest.
Well, I mean, in theory, you sort of get rid of slavery, you kill all the slavers, and you know that the second you leave, the slavers are going to take over again. I mean, this must be difficult. You went to all this trouble, all these people died, and as soon as you leave, nothing's going to change. So she decides to stay, which of course is the wrong decision. Then she leaves, and she leaves the boyfriend in her. You need to have a plan. It's like when we went into what it was, if Afghanistan or Iraq. And some people actually have said that this is all Daenerys is the United States and Iraq. But you need to have a plan. You can't just bust in, kill the people you don't like, and say, okay.
Well, that's, of course, the other thing that's important to mention here is that Daenerys' narrative in Marine is very much this kind of white savior story.
Oh, it's horrible that way.
That we have this, whitest of white blonde ladies who shows up and, is then, acclaimed by all the brown people for saving them from the slavers. Yeah. I will say, one thing I will say in favor of Game of Thrones is that there actually is no evidence for slavery being race-based in the world of Game of Thrones, which is actually accurate to the medieval world.
Well, that's why I asked you about the
there's no evidence that in the show or the books, I don't think there's any evidence that it's race-based in any way.
What do the Dothraki do with the people they capture? I mean,
they enslave them.
Oh, they do?
I think, yeah.
So they have slaves?
Yes.
So the only place slavery is illegal is Westeros. And one of our big heroes is in trouble for selling slaves.
Jorah Mormont, right, participated in the slave trade. And that's the thing, too, also, by the way, is that it sets up this odd, sanitizing of the stand-in for Western Europe as being the one real holdout against slavery, which does not have any medieval basis whatsoever.
Medieval, Renaissance, Enlightenment.
Yes. I mean, obviously, it's a little, the whole thing is disingenuous because, of course, the Western world will become known for its massive enslavement of Black people. But even, talking about the medieval world where slavery wasn't race-based in the same way, there is still essentially a kind of religious-based slavery, so that in Western Europe, it wouldn't be considered licit to enslave Christians. But if you could get a hold of, say, a Muslim slave, or honestly, even if you're an Eastern Christian slave, that's not really quite Christian enough.
And Jews could have Muslim slaves, and Muslims could have Jewish slaves, but they couldn't have Christian slaves in Christian countries.
Right. Exactly. So that that enslavement is really about religion as opposed to race, but that it's not illegal to have slaves anywhere. It's just, there aren't really slaves in England in this period in the 13th, 14th centuries, but that's not because it's illegal. It's just because they don't really have a convenient market to get Muslim slaves. So that the kind of center of enslavement in the Western world is really the Mediterranean.
And they don't need them.
Right. I mean, there's also none of these places really have plantation slavery. That slavery is really mostly domestic and urban. It's mostly actually female slavery.
What do you mean?
The majority of slaves in Western Europe are women who are enslaved and who are then put to work as domestic servants, and then also expected to get pregnant probably by their masters. So essentially they're also basically sex slaves who are then also expected to act as wet nurses for their master's children.
Oh, yeah.
Or to be rented out as such.
But no, as soon as Britain got land and places where they could grow rubber trees or whatnot, they had slaves.
Right. So medieval England doesn't have a lot of slaves, but that really is just because
they have no countries with growing rubber.
Right. So they don't have a need for nowhere in the medieval world and the medieval Western world really has a kind of need for a slave-based economy. And to the extent that there is slavery, it is, as I said, mostly kind of urban and domestic.
It's late 15th century when they start discovering the New World and they have better climates.
Yeah, that they start, developing plantations, and you have plantation slavery, right? That's really, late 15th into 16th century.
Did you hear about Rhode Island?
No.
Rhode Island is really named something like Rhode Island, the Commonwealth, and Rhode Island Plantation. And they're getting rid of the part of the name that says plantation. That was in today's news.
Good for them. About time. So, we're in a moment where a lot of things are being renamed.
Right. But
the Columbus statue in New Haven just came down.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all these statues could come down, but since it hadn't been the day we got to the top of the Columbus Circle statue in New York because some artist turned it into a house. Was really exciting. Okay, now that we're doing Game of Thrones.
Yes, and actually, though, I am just going to, because we are talking about it, I am just going to make my official statement on this podcast that, y'all, history, we do not learn that from statues. We learn that from books and documents.
Oh, I love
We don't learn that from statues that are built a century after the Civil War. That's not where we learn the history of the Civil War.
What'd they say? Oh, I can't remember what it was. It was something like they pulled down a statue of King George, and that's why nobody knows who won the American Revolution.
Right, I think Ollie posted that meme.
That was Ollie.
Ollie posted that meme in the Media-eval group. And also, by the way, because statues are usually, in fact, of the people who won, it could even be argued that, in fact, the statuary of the Confederate generals is misleading, because it would make you think, if you looked at it, that the South had won the Civil War, which they did not.
But as you said, we learn our history from books, from oral history,
from documents, and not to mention that the statues of Confederate generals in the South are largely not even historical artifacts of the Civil War. They're things that are put up in the 1960s during Jim Crow to teach Black people their place.
Yes, and there are also statues of Confederate generals in states that were not in the Confederacy. It's not their history. Oh, it's not their history. It's racist garbage.
Oh, yes. I spent a lot of time in Indiana seeing Confederate flags. Right. Indiana, a state that fought for the Union.
It's intimidating racial garbage. Racist garbage.
Yes, it is.
So you're saying the unsullied are not all people of color? Men of color?
I think they all are, but they're
men,
also...
Right?
They're all men. I think all or most of them are people of color, but they were also enslaved by a group that was all or mostly people of color.
Well, I think castrating them all is a really dangerous idea for a book or movie. I think it's horrible.
Right. Yeah.
I think that has other underlying issues that are horrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And also that was also this kind of bizarre choice because there was castration in the in the medieval world, including castration to essentially kind of make, and including there are people who are castrated who were then generals or statesmen, especially in the Byzantine Empire, and to some extent the fact that they were castrated made them less of a threat because they're not eligible to be emperor.
Yes, and the men in the harem.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That you're not a sexual threat, you're not a political threat, because any kind of, in the Byzantine Empire in particular, there's a lot of emphasis on the fact that any kind of physical blemish disqualifies you to become emperor. So the really good ways to make sure somebody wouldn't be emperor was to castrate them or blind them.
Which would you prefer if you were a male?
Oh God.
I don't think they gave him a choice. So you know.
No, but so there's a kind of odd dynamic too with this as being this kind of mass group of castrated soldiers, and it also does this kind of odd move which seems to some extent to demonize people who are intersex or gender fluid potentially, and I don't like it.
On the other hand, I think Game of Thrones does a better job with gay men than most things do on TV.
That I do agree with. That you have, I guess it's just Renly and Loras.
They're very loving relationship. I mean,
they have a loving relationship, and also their identity as gay men doesn't undermine their masculinity.
Is Loras Kingsguard?
He's Renly's Kingsguard. So it is extremely clear that Loras is an extremely capable warrior. It's extremely clear that Renly. Yeah, I can't remember if honestly he's that good as a warrior, but he's certainly considered to be a good politician, statesman.
I thought he won one battle, but I can't keep the battles of Game of Thrones straight. But he won one, and would have won another if his brother hadn't killed him.
He certainly is presented as capable as a ruler. I can't remember specifically how good he is at fighting.
Well, if he weren't, then there would be no point in killing. Well, I guess you don't want his people fighting for him. Okay.
Right. I mean, so as I said, I can't remember if he's especially good at fighting, but he certainly is taken seriously in every way as a claimant to the throne. He is certainly presented as at least a capable politician and statesman.
But it's Loras that's beaten by Brienne, right? Which really seemed to surprise him.
Yeah. But yeah, so I do actually think they do a really good job of that I don't think, as I said, I don't think either of them, there's any way in which the way they're portrayed undermines their masculinity. No. And which is a huge problem, I think, in particular. So, things like Braveheart, the way they treat Edward II, where they never actually show him openly being gay. We never actually have a scene where we never have a scene where he kisses a man.
That's bizarre.
We just have him in this kind of being portrayed as this kind of mincing effeminate.
Oh, that's silly. That's ridiculous.
Right. And so that is, and so that is something that I do think Game of Thrones does well.
But is that the only gay people? Those two?
I believe so. If anybody else has any other examples, feel free to let me know. I can't think of any other examples of openly queer characters.
A lot more incest than gay relationships.
Yeah. Which is a choice, but, so it's certainly not perfect. And it would be great, and also they, and it has this kind of one example.
That would have been a nice arc for Arya.
Oh yeah, no, especially because I actually am not especially fond of her relationship with Gendry. So honestly, I wish she had found a woman instead.
Oh, I forgot that when they think they're going to die the next day. Oh, that was ridiculous. Yeah. It was like that nice quiet night, which I liked otherwise, but that was silly.
So there aren't otherwise gay representation. There aren't any characters that I would exactly describe as being trans. I don't think Brienne dresses as a man, but I don't think there's a real serious argument to be made for her as a trans character.
Well, it's hard to be a knight in a petticoat.
Right. I mean, I think most things about the way Brienne is portrayed suggest that she does identify as a woman. She just also wants to be a knight, which, which is fine, obviously. And I think that's a cool representation of a woman.
And they don't have armor with full skirts. If you're wearing armor, you're wearing armor.
Right. So, but it does, so I don't think there are any representations of trans characters. I think you can make the argument about the Unsullied being to some extent kind of intersex or genderqueer characters.
Not by choice.
Not by choice, and Grey Worm in particular, who's the only one who we actually really get to know, does very much seem to be portrayed as somebody who identifies as male.
Am I correct in remembering that Varys doesn't have any sexual interest in anybody?
He is not portrayed as having any sexual interest in anybody. That is correct. Which, you can't even tell at this point. I mean, because how much interiority do we get? To what extent is that because of
none?
Oh, right. And so to what extent is that because of the castration? To what extent is that because he's somebody who's asexual? To what extent is it because he's somebody who we just don't actually know him well enough to get to know his sexual interest in anybody?
Nothing.
Yeah, so.
And the heterosexuals, some of them make terrible choices.
Oh, most of the heterosexuals make terrible choices. This is very, the straights are not okay in Game of Thrones.
Your mother was so beautiful and I loved her, but she's dead and didn't want to marry me. So I think you're going to be a great second best.
Yeah. The fact that there are, as you said, more incest in Game of Thrones than gay relationships, and also more that weird thing with Peter Baelish being "Welp, your mom's dead, so I guess I want to marry you, Sansa."
Nauseating.
Yeah, as I said, the straights are not okay.
That could be the name of a song. The straights are not okay.
I think it's the name of a Facebook tag group.
Oh, okay.
That I stole it from. I just want to say one other thing about race, which is related to the Unsullied in particular at the end in this last battle of Game of Thrones. The kind of big battle in King's Landing. So first of all, there's the fact that there is exactly one woman of color and they kill her off unceremoniously for basically no reason.
The other thing about
Missandei
is that she is at that war council with all the women, and there are all the men there that say nothing, and Missandei who says nothing.
Yeah. And she is a deeply underdeveloped character, and she is a character who the vast majority of her plotline is very much about serving the development of either a white woman, Daenerys, or a man, Grey Worm.
If I had the time, which I do not, I would watch all of Game of Thrones again, simply to record what she says.
Yeah, which is honestly very little.
Is she the one at the very beginning who teaches Daenerys how to get what's-his-face Khal Drogo to turn around and look at her when they have sex? Is that her, or is that somebody, a previous?
No, that's somebody else.
Oh, okay. Do they ever talk about anything besides sex and men?
Not really, no. I think at some point she sort of asks Missandei things about being a slave.
Oh, okay. You mean how was it?
Which is also, right, yeah.
Okay. I think that's okay. That's okay. There are no books.
It's okay from the perspective of it passing the Bechdel test, but I don't actually think it's great in terms of we have a conversation between a white woman and a black woman, and it's all about so how was slavery that I saved you from, I agree, white savior lady?
Right, but if you get past the white savior, I think it's interesting that she wants to know, and I don't think it's the old, you don't ask a black person today, what's it like being black? Because they're not representative of every black person. It's none of your fucking business how they feel about anything. But to ask Missandei, how was it to be? I don't find that as evil as the asking one person when you can read a book. She can't read a book.
Right, there aren't books. And I don't think it's evil, but I do think that it at least it speaks again to the fact that she's an underdeveloped character.
Right.
Who her main purpose for being there is to help Daenerys think about how slavery is bad.
Right, and to let you know that you can have a love affair with somebody who's been castrated. But I saw that in a Jane Fonda movie with Jon Voight called Coming Home. We know how that is. And we also saw that in The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. So we know all that.
Right. And so that's the thing, too, is that, that's the other way in which her character functions, is it's really about Grey Worm figuring out his sexuality and his attitudes toward freedom and enslavement. is that to some extent, like, he's processing that through her, and he's really a much more important character than she is.
He's a very disgruntled guy.
Right. And that then is the thing, too, is that they have this big last battle. So Missandei's dead. And you have Daenerys goes nuts and decides to burn down all of King's Landing. And then the dynamic that you have is that you have these rational, nice white men, Jon Snow and
first you have the
Davos
white
and
soldiers
Tyrion.
putting down their weapons. You have
so you have
Cersei's
white
army
soldiers.
putting down their weapons.
Yes. Well, yes. So Jaime Lannister sneaks up and rings the bells. So Cersei, the irrational evil woman, would never actually surrender, but a man surrenders for her.
I don't even remember that Jaime did that.
Oh yeah, Jaime sneaks up to a tower and rings the bells.
I missed.
Yeah, he surrenders. Cersei doesn't surrender.
I didn't know.
Yeah, so Jaime surrenders. The white Westerosi soldiers all put down their weapons, and then Daenerys, the crazy woman, starts killing everyone. And then Grey Worm and his men, so who are all men of color, also start killing everyone and start killing the unarmed. Yeah, so you have this visual of these black men killing these unarmed white soldiers, while the only voices of reason are these rational white men, Jon Snow and Davos and Tyrion, trying to stop this battle, while the women and the black men go crazy.
Sounds ugly.
Yeah, and I don't think it's intentional, but somebody should have thought this through.
I think you're right. I don't think...
Yeah.
I have no idea why they gave that. I think they just sort of decided they didn't want Daenerys running things, so they had to go nuts. And I think you and I have talked about it before, whether Grey Worm was working on his own or doing what she said. I think he was working on his own because he was so pissed about his girlfriend.
I think that, and he was taking cues from her.
I don't know.
I don't think she gave him an explicit order, but I think he saw that she clearly was not surrendering and said, well, I guess I don't have to surrender either.
Well, not surrender. I mean, she wouldn't even be surrendering. She would be taking over the city.
Or yes, that she's not accepting. Yeah, sorry.
You and your army go in and take all the silver and whatever else you want. It's over.
Right, that she's not, I misspoke, that she's not accepting the surrender, and so we also don't have to accept this peaceful surrender, we can murder people.
Right.
So I don't think he's acting on explicit orders, but I think he's supposed to be taking cues from her.
Okay. But saying I did it all for love is...
And again, it just, as I said, it really very much kind of feels like there's this, here are the irrational women and people of color are gonna murder people who have surrendered, and then thank God, the white men are gonna try to stop us. So I think we can move on to a couple other topics before we finish up this section.
I had one interesting thing to say about the Red Wedding. You want to hear what it is because it's funny?
Yeah. Somebody
did an interview with him, so he said, "This is what I'm basing it on," and he got all his fucking facts wrong. He got the whole Glencoe wrong about who murdered who. It's pretty funny. And then he says, no matter how much stuff I make up, there's stuff in history that's just as bad or worse. I just thought it was so funny that it got it backwards. Who murdered who? Like when your father and I were in law school together and our teacher got Marbury versus Madison wrong. Isn't that why I exist? Alive, because the teacher got Marbury Madison wrong. Anyway, that's it. I just thought it was funny.
The last big thematic thing that I want to make sure we talk about, there are obviously more. I know that we're not covering everything, but, it's a long episode already. The one big thematic thing that I wanted to chat about as well was religion. There are clear analogs to some extent. George R. R. Martin actually has said that the faith of the seven is supposed to be akin to Christianity. So the seven then being equivalent to the Trinity, that the idea that there are multiple manifestations of the divine in one. There are just more of them. So, it's kind of like the Trinity, and you add on the Virgin Mary and a couple of the saints, and then you sort of got the seven. But the thing that I find a little irritating about Game of Thrones is that, with the exception of a few brief references to people praying, among this majority faith of the seven, you really don't, until the later seasons, have anybody who really seems to take religion very seriously. And it doesn't really seem to matter in society. And one of the big ways in which that's manifested is the fact that there is no real religious intolerance. In the real medieval world, by the time you're in, say, the 13th, 14th century, medieval Christians would not be on board with people who are pagan, people who are Jewish, people who are Muslim, people who are Christians, but a Christianity defined as heretical. Gonna pause while some dog squeaking definitely got in there. People who fit into those categories, I'm just giving up on the dog squeaking, people who fit into those categories would not be considered to be people who would have full rights, the same rights as Christians, that you would be in various ways second-class members of society. And that's the thing that in particular feels like it's lacking, the intolerance and treatment as second-class members of society of people who do not belong to the majority faith.
Do we have proselytizing?
We do not have any. So the Red Gods, actually, they seem to so there's the faith of the Red God, these kind of extreme monotheists who also, interestingly, are the ones who seem to actually have some kind of power that they actually derive from their religion and that they can resurrect people. The faith of the Red God, they have proselytizing, and the people who belong to that faith do seem to take it quite seriously.
And the Sparrow doesn't proselytize?
The Sparrow does, but I'm getting to the Sparrow in a second. I'm talking about pre-Sparrow because that actually does change the dynamic to some extent. But pre-Sparrow, and so in the first 5 seasons, you don't have proselytism, you don't have religious intolerance coming from the majority faith. It's considered to be completely fine that there's a major noble family. The Starks are believers in the old gods. Something that, the old gods are, I assume, supposed to be basically pagan. I suppose the other alternative technically would be Jews. Certainly neither would be acceptable members of the nobility in the 14th, 15th century. And so that's one of the things that does, I think, kind of weaken the world building for me, is that you don't have that, you really don't have kind of exclusivity in religion, which is true of essentially all faiths in the medieval world, that basically all of them are essentially various stripes of exclusive monotheism that consider other religions to be inherently wrong and act accordingly.
But you do have geographical territorial distinctions, right? So the north is this, Bravos is this.
Bravos is complicated in that it's outside the kingdom.
What about the Iron Island?
So there's the Iron Islands who worship weird Jesus.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Partly it's geographical territorial. I don't know what but who would move to the Iron Islands and say, "Hi, find me a tree that I can worship the iron trees."
Right. There's that it's kind of part geographical, but they are still all ostensibly under the rule of the same monarch. You're laughing at my cat trying to eat my hair. They are still under the rule of the same monarch. I mean, so the closest equivalent that you would have would be sort of early modern, when you have rulers who basically at some point kind of accept the fact that we have some Catholic and some Protestant territories.
They don't really accept it, but okay.
Eventually, they sort of accept it. Late 16th, 17th century? Is that the treaty of, what treaty is that? Whatever. But eventually there's this kind of declaration of territoriality that the kind of local rule, the kind of local princes and lords under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany get to basically decide for their own territory.
Not 16th century, because Philip the whatever is still going to war against the lowlands.
Right, but even that's not actually a precise parallel, because there's really no evidence, on the other hand, that I don't know what they're doing in the Iron Islands, but everybody's terrible there. But there's no real reason to think that in the north that the Starks care if you worship the 7 gods or the Red God or whoever.
Oh, but you get wives, right? Because Catelyn is not from the north.
Yeah, Catelyn is a practitioner of the faith of the 7, and that's fine. Nobody seems to care.
And what is Cersei?
Cersei is presumably of the faith of the 7 based on geographical stuff, although it's really hard to tell because she doesn't really seem to ever care.
But that's really the major religion.
Yes, that is the majority faith in Westeros is the seven, with the old god still mostly but not exclusively prevailing in the north, and the drowned god being the thing to do
Iron Islands.
in the Iron Islands. And then there's this red god people here and there. And then there are
They're
other...
not local. They're not localized.
No, they're not localized. And then there are the other religious groups that seem to be exclusively outside Westeros. So like in Braavos, there's the many-faced god, and that really seems to be a Braavos thing.
Right.
The only people who seem on board with that in Westeros are Braavosi people, and the Dothraki seem to have their own horsey kind of god.
I actually don't remember any religious scenes from the Dothraki.
There's vague references here and there to some god that they worship.
Okay.
I think he likes horses.
To eat, to ride, to screw, what?
Definitely to eat and ride. And that I will say, the Mongols did actually eat from their horses on the go.
I actually don't remember a religious wedding scene. I just remember all the semi-rapes or real rapes and murders. I don't remember any religion.
No, we did not actually see any religion. The religious references are later, I think. There's the religious kind of ritual when she's pregnant.
Oh, okay. And what were the Targaryens?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure it's that clear.
Okay.
They kind of seem like they worship themselves.
Oh, wouldn't.
Right?
But that doesn't make any sense then.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, there's not much religion in the Wars of the Roses stuff. It's just not an issue because everybody's the same.
Right.
So it just doesn't, you read this, you read that, somebody goes to chapel, you take sanctuary in a church, and other than that, it just really doesn't matter.
Right, because everybody's all just basically, they're all the same kind of Christian. It doesn't matter.
Right, and there were no Jews.
Right, and that's, because the Jews had been expelled a century or so before. And so that's the thing, too, is that, if you read, medieval texts, it doesn't really make sense that in the unlikely event that you had what does essentially then come down to a battle that is between faiths, nobody has, religious polemic about it.
Okay, so I think it's actually very nice, but that's certainly another example of something that's inauthentic.
Yeah, very much so.
But I think it's nice. I mean, I think some of their religions are icky, but it's not my business. I mean, the hang god
right.
and the thing. But really, that is just a fake Jesus.
Yeah, but everybody is very chill about religion in a way that I would not describe the medieval world as being chill about religion on the whole.
But what were you going to say about how the sparrows change everything? They're so horrible.
Yeah, so that is the one moment where they kind of... Yeah, that essentially they bring in the sparrows, the High Sparrow and his little sparrows, I guess, as characters.
And septs and septas, which are like the nuns and the monks.
Yes, and they'd had those before, but they're just kind of vague, they sort of help with the children sort of figure. They don't do anything really until you introduce them as real forces under the High Sparrow.
We're not going to have time to talk about the portrayal of children in this entire series, which is too bad.
No, we're not. The High Sparrow introduces this essentially religious radicalism, which has shades of the Inquisition, which has shades of some of the church attempts that are often a little bit later, 15th century, to kind of crack down on sexuality outside the bounds of marriage. And then it's sort of an odd thing that clearly the kind of referent for them visually and this kind, including the language of sparrows, seems to sort of be the Franciscans.
Yeah, like your little wine bottle thing that you bought.
Yeah, so they've got the brown robes. I got a nice little Franciscan wine bottle cover, which was brown. So yeah, they've got the brown robes. I don't know, they kind of have this animal reference. They're very into radical voluntary poverty. So they have these kind of shades of the Franciscans, but in terms of their behavior and their kind of establishment of this sort of inquisitorial court, they're much more like the Dominicans. And both Franciscans and Dominicans are involved to some extent in the fight against heresy, but the Dominicans, I would say, much more heavily, and the Inquisition is really very much kind of based around the Dominicans. It's, I would say, overall, religion in this series is pretty inauthentic to the medieval world. The High Sparrow kind of gets at some things that are medieval inspired a little bit more, but, it's definitely a kind of complicated mix of inspirations, let's just say. Also, well, and also I guess I just want to say that it is, however, extremely satisfying to watch them all get blown the fuck up. Thank you, Cersei, for showing what to do with religious fundamentalists.
What I sort of liked until it turned into a rape scene was her having that unequivalent septa.
Yeah.
Right, because she was the woman who was leading her down the walk of shame, saying, confess, confess, shame, 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 shame.
And she'd been involved in torturing her before that, too.
Oh, okay. Her!
Yeah.
And then what Cersei, well, the waterboarding is something else, but when Cersei says to her, shame, shame, I'm going to confess, why did I fuck my brother? Because I wanted to. I like it. So I actually really liked that until she brought in God to Gregor.
Yeah, and kind of turned her over to get raped by zombie Clegane.
I mean, assuming that was what, who knows what Gregor Clegane wants to do to another human being, but
that's true.
But that was gross. I mean, I'm glad we didn't have to see it, because I think they couldn't even imagine it, because it would have been so horrible. But until then, you really gotta like tit for tats and quid pro quos.
Right. Yeah. As I said, I really kind of like Cersei. I know she's evil, and I know she like pushed a kid out the window and like, she got her brother to push a kid out the window. Like, I know she's like terrible. But I you gotta like her.
But I enjoy her as a character. I think those are two different things. No, I don't like her at all.
Which is fair.
But no, as a character, she's probably one of the more complex, always interesting until the last episode. Next to last episode.
Yeah. And I do think that she was cheated by her. She's one of the many characters that I think was cheated by her ending in terms of her kind of forced passivity.
But she was cheated by her father from the get-go. I mean, that whole thing of basically selling your children to make political alliances, I understand it's standard, but it's horrible.
Right.
I don't understand why people did it.
Right, but I think because the end bothers me because I feel like Cersei is a character who, despite the assorted ways in which she is disadvantaged, has an immense amount of agency and accrues to herself an immense amount of power, and then is really deprived of that and is made somebody who is passive and lacks agency in her ending.
I don't disagree, but I will say that the only character who ends up with any agency and power, other than Bronn as treasurer, is Sansa. Nobody really ends up with anything.
Yeah.
Jon's end is garbage. Arya's end is garbage.
So that's a good lead into the Fabula Nostra section, where for this, we're going to do a little bit differently again and talk about basically what we might have liked to have seen done differently. How do we feel about this as an adaptation of the books, and about how the showrunners then finished a series based on a series of books that was not finished. Will the books ever end? Who knows? Almost certainly not. And I'm going to go ahead and say something about Bronn. It's the fact that Bronn, who we've not really mentioned thus far, but everybody remember Bronn. Bronn's like the, womanizing asshole who's like on Tyrion's side, and then he switches sides, and then who gives a shit?
And he keeps getting castles and wives and stuff.
It's ridiculous.
He's getting rewarded.
And Bronn ends up as Master of the Coin based on, I guess, the fact that he's used to, paying women at brothels? Like, this is the worst pick for this. Like, it's the only pick for the Secretary of the Treasury that's worse than Steve Mnuchin.
That's what they say. And what I wanted done differently, the most minor thing I wanted done differently, not the important things. What I really, really liked in the book was, you were just talking about that Beric Dondarrion can't die because the priest of the Red God keeps bringing him back to life. Mm-hmm. I didn't like, he was just a mess. But what I liked about that was that after Catelyn Stark gets murdered at the Red Wedding, he gives her his spark of life. Yeah. And he is willing to die so that Catelyn Stark, in some sense, can live. And then she spends the rest of her time hanging people.
Murdering phrase.
I love that. Oh, there's a murdered person. Must be Catelyn Stark hanging this guy.
Lady Stoneheart.
Lady Stoneheart.
And I feel like it's especially disappointing because one of the issues that I kind of realized that I had rewatching these episodes that we watched is that they kill off relatively early most of the most talented actors.
Oh, did they have to? Was that in the book?
To some of them, yes, some of them, no.
Okay.
I mean, like Charles Dance, Sean Bean, they can act circles around most of these children.
But Charles
like
Dance
they have to kill them
in
off.
The book. That's in the book.
Yeah, so part of, so a lot of it is in the book.
And what's his face?
Right, obviously, like you have to kill Ned Stark, you have to kill Tywin Lannister. That's in the book. It kind of is what it is. But you are sort of left with the fact that, by the end, Peter Dinklage is very talented, Lena Headey is very talented. I don't think most of the younger cast are, honestly, I don't think they're that talented. I don't think Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke can actually, and Sophie Turner can actually carry a TV show.
The best of the the two best of the unknown young people, I thought, were Joffrey, who was so awful, he's taken until now to get offered another job.
I thought he actually retired. I thought he basically was like...
Somebody offered him a job, and on TV, and he seems to have taken it. But he was...
Or I thought he was basically like, I don't want to be typecast as like a shit person, and basically pseudo-retired because he could only get these
stuff, but he seems to be coming back. But at any rate, he was terrific. I made me forget the second person. Arya was good. I'm not sure she was irreplaceable. Oh, the second person that I thought was terrific was Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah. I still don't like him. And I do, by the way, I think they basically use pity to replace a redemption arc for most of Theon Greyjoy's character.
Well, when people said that George R.R. Martin can't really write his way out of a paper bag, it's just a good story, yada yada, I always disagreed. And I thought that George R.R. Martin did something really difficult, which was take Theon Greyjoy, who's like the epitome of evil for what he does, and make him somebody you sympathize with. Even if you don't like him, you gotta end up... And I think that's an amazing feat. Mm-hmm. So no, I mean, he ends up... He does have a redemptive arc. He does two things to redempt himself, so to speak. Maybe three. I don't really care about his sister maybe as much as I should, but our introduction to her is so bizarre.
Oh, right. Yeah, she pretends she wants to sleep with her brother. It's really not great. There's so much incest.
It's just so bizarre. Why'd you do that? I didn't recognize
far too much incest.
But at any rate, to make you... I mean, obviously, it's partly because Ramsay Bolton is so horrible.
Right.
But it's hard not to sympathize with somebody who has had nearly their entire... so that's another castrated person. A lot of castrated men on this show.
There really are, yes. And somebody like Theon Greyjoy is to some extent more akin to the, involuntarily castrated as punishment, like a Peter Abelard type.
I'm sorry, I have no idea what our topic actually was.
So we're talking about the kind of show and what we might have done differently in terms of what they changed from the book, how they ended.
Violence against women.
Yeah, that would be nice if they just, just change that.
No, they added. I mean, it's the kind of thing. So Joffrey's a shit. Joffrey is a horrible person. He cuts off Ned Stark's head. And he says to Sansa, "Why don't you come see this?" He's horrible.
And look at your dad's head. Yeah.
Horrible. So why do we also have to have a scene with Joffrey and those two prostitutes where he sort of makes... Right. That's not in the book. What do you need
Right, the Joffrey prostitute murder scene. It's like, so you have this gratuitous violence against women as this just extra way to say Joffrey's bad.
Off watching this scene. What is the point of it?
Right, we already know Joffrey's disgusting. We don't need this extra scene to show that Joffrey is disgusting, and it feels very gratuitous. I do have kind of complicated feelings about the situation with Sansa in that I feel like to some extent
I mean,
I
her
don't
and
like the
Ramsay
scene.
Bolton?
I think there are problems with the scene, yes. I'm not defending the scene, but I think there's a weird way in which people got more up in arms about the scene in the show than they did in the book, which bothers me because the only real change is that they changed it from a minor character we didn't care about to a woman we actually do care about.
I don't think that's necessarily it. I think it's a class thing.
Right, that she's also like, she's not noble, right? And so it's that like,
so it's
we
not
have
that
this
big a deal.
right, and so it's, and you know, because the show for years had been based on the sexual abuse and assault of lower status women,
Right.
and in the book, the Ramsay Bolton's rape of Jane Poole is just a continuation of that, and it does, I think, reveal something sort of unpleasant, that people only really started complaining about sexual assault in Game of Thrones when it happened to a
Highborn
woman who was both elite and who was an important character who mattered.
and a Stark.
And a star, right.
Because they're so clearly the good guys.
Right.
Stupid!
And so you know, I'm not defending the scene, but I do think that is problematic, that's the first point in which people started complaining about sexual assault being not acceptable in Game of Thrones.
Right. I think it's totally elitist classes.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't have complained if it was Jane Poole.
Or at least that certainly it would not have had at least anywhere near as much of a backlash.
Right.
And that I think is troublesome. Even though, as I said, I certainly don't mean to defend the scene.
No, of course not.
So yeah, so it would be nice to have, you know, just straight up like not had all of those gratuitous, unnecessary sexual assault and violence against women scenes.
And the missed opportunities to have women bonding.
Yeah. And I will say also, I think the end is dumb. I think that the whole like, Bran should be king because he's the best story. Bran's story isn't the best story, because if Bran's story was the best story, they wouldn't have basically cut him out for a season because they didn't know what to do with him because he was just sitting and looking at a tree. I
liked Bran as running things because I really hate the whole idea of your firstborn son gets the monarchy. So I really like having the idea where one way or another, they're going to have to pick somebody else.
Right. I like that. I mean, so actually what I think they should have done is I think they should have split the Seven Kingdoms.
Oh, yes. There was no point in having a centralized government at all.
Right. I mean, you have a kind of loose confederation or alliance. But really, there's really no point for all of these things to, you know, there's clearly extreme regionalism. Like, maybe a couple of them would team up, but really, I mean, so the North breaks off, but like, why is the Iron Islands part of Westeros? Why is Dorne part of Westeros?
That's so crazy. So Sansa raises her hand and says, "Excuse me, I'd rather be independent." And Bran says, "Yeah, sure." And then, well,
yeah, because it's a sister.
Where's Yara?
Right, where's Yara? Where is the...
never wanted to be part of Westeros.
Neither of the Dornish.
So why aren't they raising their hands?
Right.
And why would anybody want to go back to King's Landing? What's in King's Landing?
Nothing. King's Landing is a burning shambles.
So no, I don't understand why they need any kind of centralized government. And much as I'm perfectly fine with Bran, but nobody has any qualifications.
And I don't think Bran has any qualifications.
He can see into people's heads. You can see the past.
I don't think it's a qualification.
No, I guess not. The person who should have been in charge, if it had happened at the end of season 7, was Tyrion. But Tyrion turned out, and this is one of the things I'm very disappointed about, he lost all his judgment, all his wits, all his brilliant planning for a blonde.
Yeah, that they just kind of did this thing where they basically decided, well, he's in alliance with Daenerys, and so that's just who he is now, and they really did a disservice to his character.
And he lost all his integrity. I mean, really, handing Varys over was one of the most painful things I have ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, they did a disservice to a lot of characters, and I think they did a disservice to Jaime Lannister as well, who really, I think, had an arc of
he did.
Finding things that he cared about outside of fucking his sister. And then it was like, wait, nope, never mind. And then he just goes back to like die with her. It's ridiculous.
He was turning into a good human being, and then he just gave it up.
Yeah. And then it's irritating too, because I think Brienne is a fantastic character. But then the thing that they decide they need to focus on in terms of, because Brienne's captain of the Kingsguard at the end, the thing they decide they need to focus on is like Brienne memorializing Jaime. Like she deserves better than just like having her last scene be like thinking about Jaime Lannister, a man who like ditched her to go and make out with his sister.
I agree, though. I think that's her job.
Yes, but that's not the only part of her job. That's
Right.
not that didn't have to be the part that they focused on.
I thought it was sort of nice. I thought it was sort of sweet that she was putting her feelings aside to write what she thought was a fair assessment. I thought it was actually very sweet.
Oh, I disagreed. I thought that it was not her putting her feelings aside. I thought it was her giving Jaime a more generous assessment than he deserved because of her feelings for him.
That's possible too, but yeah. I don't know. Whenever I see her, I'm just so moved by what she does.
Right. No, I mean, I like her a lot, and I think she's also very talented. I wish they'd put her to better use, actually, in Star Wars.
Beside what?
She's oh God, what is her name?
Oh, you didn't
Phasma.
just make a mistake. Okay, but the thing about her and I'm glad she got to sleep with somebody, whatever. But what I really like best, and why it doesn't bother me how nice she was to Jaime, was in my favorite episode of any season, really, though certainly the last season, the night before the big battle, when they're talking, and Tyrion's being an asshole and playing that drinking game and making her admit she's a virgin. He was just being a jerk.
Well, that's what he does.
But it came up that she wanted to be a knight, and Renly never knighted her, yada yada, and there's no king around. And then Jaime says, "You don't need a king. All you need is a knight. Kneel."
Yeah, and I thought that was lovely.
That was the high point of his life, one of the high points of her life. So the fact that she was kind to him in that memorandum actually didn't bother me at all. I thought it was perfectly adequate payback for his knighting her, which I think was really more important than his sleeping with her.
Oh, right. No, I mean, it's not that I thought she shouldn't exactly have been kind to him. It's that it felt like they put an undue amount of emphasis on that as the importance of her arc and her responsibility as the Kingsguard.
But she has nothing else
Bron's
to do.
supposed to run the entire economy, and the only thing he seems to give a shit about is a brothel. So, like...
Right, but she has nothing else to do in the Kingsguard. Nope, she's in Sansa's Kingsguard, right?
No, she's Bran's Kingsguard.
Oh, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he just get some wildlings?
I don't think the wildlings even know who we are. He's a tree.
I'm not even disagreeing with you, but John's end is just as stupid. Grey Worm's ending is just as stupid. All these endings are terrible.
They really are, yes.
You like Edmure Tully's when he stands up, and Sansa says, "Sit down."
That really is the best ending, is Edmure Tully like showing up after like 6 seasons of everybody being like, is Edmure Tully alive?
Him since he was basically, one would think, arrested at the Red Wedding.
Right. So it's been 5 seasons of everyone just being like, is Edmure Tully still alive? And then he just shows up, and then this very white man move is like, I have an opinion and I can help. And Sansa's just like, sit the fuck down, Uncle Edmure. Sansa's ending is like the one that I genuinely like, and that I think
she's Queen of the
sense.
North, or whatever she's calling herself.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. But I think,
is anyone alive?
What do you mean, anyone?
After the battle with the White Walkers, who's alive?
I think actually Tormund is still alive.
No, I mean of the bannermen, the lords and ladies.
Oh, I don't remember anymore. No idea.
Right, because Lady Mormont's not.
Honestly, she's the only one I find that memorable, so.
Right, but she's got to be ruling somebody.
Yeah, she's ruling Bear Island? Is that what it's called?
I don't know. But all those people who said, King of the North, I've no idea who's alive and who isn't.
Some of them have got to be.
And there's no more Night Watch, right?
There is. That's what John's doing.
No, he left. He walked out with his
Not
dog
anymore.
and his bud.
No, he's got sent back.
Yeah, and then they walked out. Because there's nothing
Oh, right.
to guard.
He kind of went beyond the wall to fuck off and do whatever.
There.
Right.
So I'm glad she's Lady of the North, Queen of the North, but I don't know what the hell she's going to do all day.
Right. Really, I think what I actually really want is a spin-off where Ghost and Nymeria and Drogon hang out and say, what the fuck are all these
Who's
humans
Drogon?
doing? The dragon, the one dragon that survives.
I don't want that dragon to survive. It's very dangerous.
He does. And also that's it. Like the
No,
dragon has an interesting
I
end.
think he puts himself on the funeral pyre.
I don't know if there's evidence of that.
There's no evidence of anything. He picks her up. He destroys the Iron Throne, right?
Yeah. He picks up his mom and he burns down the Iron Throne and he takes off.
Right.
Yeah. Also, by the way, in terms of Daenerys' character, the fact that she is presented as being overly paranoid, and that's the main distinguishing feature of her character after she turns crazy, but yet she totally does not suspect that Jon Snow is going to fucking stab her. No sense. Makes no sense.
Well, what really bothered me the most about the end of Daenerys, near the end of Daenerys, was that whole business about, oh, Jon, I know you have the right to the throne more than me, but please don't tell anybody because I'm so pretty. And then, oh, you told your sister, well, you know what happens to people who know. And she actually threatens Sansa.
Right.
And Arya too, though she doesn't seem to know that Arya's alive. But that whole thing about, I know you have a better claim, so swear to me you won't tell anybody? That's ridiculous!
Yeah, no, it's not a great.
I mean, that bothered me really as a personality thing, as a queenly thing, more than her destroying all of King's Landing. I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, the other one was vindictive. It was bad. It wasn't very nice. It was murderous. But, oh, don't tell anybody. I don't really have the best claim to the throne.
Right. No, I mean, that was ridiculous. It was poorly done. I mean, I don't know. And also, like, I feel like the season just kind of, like, I don't know. Like, a lot of the end, I feel like, just, like, devolved into parody. And like that, I just couldn't stop laughing at the scene where they're revealing that, you know, Jon Snow is really a Targaryen, a thing that most people guessed like ages ago, and of course they have to reveal this like as like Bran
before the books ended.
Yeah.
Remember when we were looking that up?
And they reveal that as like Bran and Samwell's voiceover,
so
like while we're watching Jon fuck his aunt.
That was disgusting. Oh, that was so ridiculous. And one of the episodes we watched was Bran seeing the young Ned and the young Lyanna. Mm-hmm. That was so badly filmed.
It was.
That was just
it was
horrible.
Bad.
But yes, and most people guessed that, though I don't remember when people figured out that would make him his aunt.
Right, which of course it does. It's his aunt.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, the Wars of the Roses too. Marry your cousin, your aunt, whatever, because then you have a double claim to the throne.
Right, I mean, it's a perennial issue in medieval and early modern Europe that you marry your aunts and your cousins and your nieces all the time.
Right, but it was unclear to me why the last time she made a pass at him, he said no.
Right, and I was like, is that because
a mass murderer or because she's her aunt?
I wasn't clear on that.
But that's sloppy writing.
It is. I'm going to give them a pass on that just because I genuinely don't remember if it was clearer when I was watching the episode straight through as opposed to when I was watching the episode. Yeah, so as I said, I'll give them a pass because maybe it was clearer at the time.
The only good thing in the last two episodes was when she's on top of the steps, mm-hmm. and it really looks like she's been beatified and has angel wings, mm-hmm. and then you see it's really just that her dragon is standing behind her. I mean, that was gorgeous.
And I will say, her wardrobe in general is fantastic.
A little revealing.
You know, she's very pretty. Again, I think she's fine as an actress. I think that the season really was like, I think that last season, it really was undermined by the fact that like Kit Harington, Emilia Clarke, and Sophie Turner cannot carry a TV show.
I think that she actually did her best acting in like the first episode with her brother.
Right.
And when she ate the horse heart.
Right. Yeah, I think she got worse.
But, you know, I mean, the real issue is why they didn't make more of Arya.
Yeah, no, and I think they really did. I think they really did squander that character in a lot of ways because she's a fantastic character. She had in a lot of ways the most satisfying
she's a talented
moments.
Kid. She's great.
Yeah, so I think of the young actors, I think she's the best.
Well, I still have my vote for Theon Greyjoy, but she can come in second or first.
I think she's certainly up there among the younger actors as among the most talented. Yeah, and as I said, I think they really squandered her. I think they could have done a lot more with her.
Well, I think that's one of the things you have to think about, assuming that he really does finish book 6 as opposed to book 7, because I think there have to be at least 2 more, though he can do what he wants. What he's going to do with Arya.
Right. So, and we'll see. As I said, you know, I'm certainly not holding my breath for him writing more books. I suppose it's not impossible. Somebody will finish the series. Somebody else will finish the series, and I just finished Wheel of Time, and the last, I think, 3 books were written by somebody else.
That happens a lot. The thing is, though, I can't remember how far they got, what he got. I mean, one of the things I really liked about Arya was the relationship between her and the Hound.
We had some of that, at least in the book.
Yes, we did. She leaves him to die. Mm-hmm. I remember that because then they say somebody's back because he's wearing the Hound hat, but it's really somebody else, and we don't know if he's alive or dead, yada, yada. But the other thing is, in the book, Gilly and Sam have, what's his name? Mance Rayder,
right. There's that whole thing in the book where they switch babies with Mance Rayder.
And he's still alive and has their baby.
Right, and it's this whole thing because I think they're worried about Melisandre killing people for King's blood because she hasn't even done the thing where she and Stannis murder Shireen, which I also think is out of character for Stannis.
Shireen's not in the book?
She's not dead, no.
Bad showrunners.
Yeah, that murder has not.
It's not him that made Stannis Agamemnon. It's the showrunners.
Yeah, that's not in what we have of the books.
Oh, it's disgusting.
I mean, obviously, we don't know what Martin told them of his plans and what he didn't. You know, supposedly he told them something. We can't know for sure.
A little piece of paper with all the endings.
Right. They clearly had more than they clearly ended up expanding on that if that's what they got. So, but we don't know what direction Martin gave them and what they came up with themselves. But the thing with Shireen is not in the books as they currently exist.
I would like, if he keeps writing, to really ignore the TV show and just to keep going the way he had started with whoever is alive, whoever is dead is dead, because they don't correlate between the book and the TV show, and just let him write it and not be influenced by the TV show. That's what I would like.
Right. I mean, of course, right now in the books, we technically don't know if Jon Snow is alive or dead.
That's where we end the books.
The solution to that in this show is what I guessed was going to happen.
Not me. I never in a million years would have guessed that the Red Lord would bring him back. I was just saying, maybe a blood transfusion. Maybe they didn't get a real organ.
Yeah, I was assuming that was the point of Melisandre being there.
Missed it totally.
Yeah, so my assumption is that that's the plan in the book. I would bet that he's going to be brought back in just that way if that book ever gets written.
Well, we always assumed he'd be alive because we knew from the get-go that he was the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. We figured that out years before. Doesn't mean we're right, but we figured that out.
Right, and I think at some point he basically kind of hinted. He basically at some point said I mean, if you write something and it's supposed to be a twist and then all your readers guess it, do you change it? I guess you kind of can't, can you? And
Right.
that's clearly what he was talking about. And then, at some point it got revealed in the show. It has not yet been confirmed formally in the books, but, like that, it's clearly what he's been setting up.
Right. 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 Well, does he realize that that makes her his aunt?
Honestly, there's so much incest already. Like the aunt-nephew relationship is like, not the worst. So
I forgot what we found when we looked it up from Jewish law. I think a man is allowed to marry his niece, but an aunt can't marry her. Not that it's related at all, but I think in general there are distinctions between whether it's an aunt and a nephew, which people frown on, or whether it's an uncle and a niece, which is not so bad.
I certainly found uncle-niece marriages. I have a couple in my documents of
Oh,
Jewish
wow.
uncle-niece marriages.
Wow, well, I guess because we're allowed.
And they're mostly cases where the woman was an heiress and they didn't want it to go out of the, and like, so my assumption is that they didn't want it to go out of the family. So they're like, here, marry your uncle.
Right. Oh, yeah. But yeah, so I think we have all of my notes on your Fabula Nostra.
Yeah. So at this point, I think it's time for us to rate Game of Thrones.
Who goes first?
I can go first. So we rate on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is the worst. Criteria is subjective and up to whoever is doing the rating. I think I'm going to go for a 3.5. I think there are ways in which Game of Thrones is a really interesting teaching tool about the medieval world, but I also think there are ways in which it's an irresponsible portrayal and poor portrayal of a medieval-inspired world, and those things very much coexist with one another. And as a show itself, there are things obviously that I love about it. I would like to take the last season and throw it into a fire. So a 3.5 feels about right for me.
It's a really tough one because it's for me, it's one of those things where by and large, there's a lot more killing than I liked, a lot more sexual violence against women, and the last episodes were horrible. But other than that, I really, really loved nearly every episode I saw. And frankly, if I could just sort of sit around and watch the opening credits over and over again, and how they change from year to year because different cities.
The credits are great.
The thing is brilliant. Politically, I don't love it, not because of what you're thinking about, but when we did go to Belfast, we found out how much money they spent just to make it winter.
Right.
It was like $250,000. We're in Belfast. Pounds? Every time they wanted to put snow on the ground and take it. People are hungry, for God's sakes.
Right. In a moment where, with the pandemic and everything else, where I think people are hopefully becoming more thoughtful about economic inequality, the amount of money that was spent on this show is insane.
It is insane. On the other hand, it gave unbelievable amounts in the long run to Northern Ireland and probably Croatia because of all the people coming to go on Games of Thrones tours, but be that as it may.
And they did, I believe, hire a lot of local extras.
Oh, they had to. Every single person we met in Belfast. I was this, my friend was dead for the whole show, my uncle was this guy, everybody. They had to hire locals, at least in Belfast. Everybody was local. And then even we took a little boat tour, and the guy says, oh yes, they hired me to give them water lore. And this is, so I was helping them when Arya jumped off a boat or something, because I knew where she would jump and where she would come out and how wet she was. Amazing. But at any rate, so I love nearly every episode, but the violence against women is so troublesome, plus the racism, that I think I would have to give it a 4. Just to punish it for how they treat women and people of color.
Right. And as I said, I think even a lot of the things that they did well on gender, they really squandered in the last season. It never did well on race, and
Right.
it did not get better.
Right. But I would be lying if I didn't say I adored nearly every episode.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
so
think I
would
could
you.
say that until the last. I think I could say
Right.
that until the last season,
Right.
where I felt like I was just mad most of the time I was watching
Right.
the last season.
Though the second episode in the last season is one of the best TV hours I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I like that,
Most
like
of
the
it.
quiet before the battle. Yeah, and that was
Right.
a lovely episode. But yeah, no, I mean,
And then it goes
I got
downhill.
so angry
But-
watching
and
that last
they
season.
dialed it in. They've admitted they had no interest in the last season.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair assessment of it. So as we wrap up, are there places where the listeners could find you on the internet?
I think just under my name, I'm sitting there on Facebook and Twitter because I never remember to get a secret handle.
Isn't your handle? Aren't you? What's it? You have something as your Twitter handle isn't just Beth Greenfeld, is it?
Beth G20904.
Yes, I think so. It's not a secret. It's your Twitter handle.
No. Right. But I mostly use it to complain to organizations and to like things.
Well,
But yes.
people could follow you on Twitter if they so desired.
But my Facebook is my name, right?
Uh-huh.
And you
Yeah.
spelled it right and everything.
I didn't spell it right. You spelled it right.
Oh, okay.
It's your. I didn't set up your Facebook
No,
account.
I meant on your introduction. You pronounced it right.
Yes, of course I did. I'm your daughter. I know what your name is. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts, and I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval-pod and join our Facebook group. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. And finally, if you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Media.